Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where in today's episode, you'll hear how OP gets back at her cheating fiance. Guys, it's a really long story, so do buckle up and make sure you have time to listen to the whole thing, as it's a wild story. I hope you enjoy it, and do hit that subscribe button for future stories. So this happened to me about 1999-2000, when I was 19 to 20 years old. My friend told me that this was the juiciest revenge and karma he's ever heard of, and that I should post it here. If you've ever been cheated on by somebody you love, this is for you. I was single after 5 years with my then boyfriend, and had finally mustered up the courage to tell my junior high school crush, let's call him Douche Nozzle, about the candle I'd been holding for him for the past 7 years, ever since the first time we met. I was still somewhat new to the Pacific Northwest after leaving my home of Alaska, and figured, well, he's in Alaska and I'm here and I'm never moving back. So I might as well let the unspoken thing be spoken, get the answer I'm sure is coming, and move on with my life. Now, I was pretty sure that once I laid down all the cards, he wouldn't have wanted to be friends with me anymore. Or he would have said something like, "I'm not into you that way." So I was expecting, at most, an awkward conversation with him, but to my surprise, he reciprocated my expression of sincere love. Deanne and I had been friends for all that time, and though I never dropped hints to him about it, I did tell my closest friend at the time. He and I even kissed once during our first school year together, and even though I wanted to, I didn't ever press the issue or pursue him further, giving him the chance to take the lead, which he didn't. His words to me were so poetic and so full of promise, including him saying, "I always had a thing for you and never knew how to approach you." Basically the same kind of stuff I told him. 7 years later, having not the slightest clue that he was going to react that way at all, it made me question my decision about never moving back. I mean, never? After the phone call professing love for each other, the word never seemed so extreme. If I relaxed that decision, maybe I could have the opportunity for the relationship I've wanted for so long. I had a really great perk with a family member who was a pilot, and was able to fly on a buddy pass or a standby ticket pretty often. So I decided to fly up to Alaska every couple of weeks to see Deanne. Once news got around, everybody in our circle of friends would exclaim, "Oh my god, you and Deanne? I always hoped you two would end up together. You are the perfect couple." Now, I thought it was super cheesy and romantic, but it actually felt validating and nice because that's what I wanted people to say about us. So after several months of traveling to see him every couple of weeks, he asked me to marry him. I said yes, and then without hesitation, started planning the move back to Alaska to be together. I made my plans for the move, packing up all my belongings and parcel shipping everything. Thankfully, it wasn't much, because I was still so young and did not own any furniture. Deanne and I were gonna live together at this place, where he had a roommate, let's call him Bicycle Man, who I will never forget, and the reason why is coming up. So in the scant number of days before my final flight back to Anchorage, I started feeling kind of icky and gross, and after several days of that, followed my intuition and took a pregnancy test. I found out that I was pregnant. I was so overjoyed that I called him one evening to tell him about it. There was a party at this place, and I spoke with Deanne briefly and said, "I have some news I want to share with you," and he said, "But first I have to tell you about this really cool artist chick." And then he told me about this girl who came to the party. Let's call her Thought. And yes, that's a terrible nickname because I'm too lazy to think of a better acronym. I was irked by the way he was talking about her and realized that this is not the time for a big reveal. I think I said something to him like, "Don't do anything you'll regret." He asked me to call him later on to tell him whatever the news was, so I said I would, and then I did. Hours later, whoever answered the phone said that Deanne was there, but he couldn't come to the phone right now. I had this awful stomach-sinking feeling, because I had a feeling about what was happening, and Deanne never called me back that evening. I called him the next morning, and no answer. I was heartbroken. That evening, I finally got to talk with him, and reminded him that I have news, but he interrupted me to say, "I have to tell you something." And then my stomach-sinking feeling was now turning to nausea. He then admitted to me over the phone that he cheated on me with Thought. I hung up the phone on him, and I threw up. He didn't call me back to ask what my news was, and I called him back later to verbally upbraid him, and all he could do was ask for forgiveness and tell me that it was a mistake. I told him there was no chance that I would marry him after that, and that it was not a mistake, buddy, that was a choice. I said I would be up there to get my things and then be gone for good. It took every ounce of my emotional strength to verbalize my thoughts without screaming. So I miscarried the pregnancy that week, On top of dealing with getting over him, I had to deal with the immense pain of losing my first pregnancy. And then to top it all off, I had to fly to Anchorage weeks before Christmas to pick up all the stuff I already shipped there. I basically had to wait for it to arrive, with nowhere else to go but that idiot's home. I had to face him and be around him after having my heart thoroughly crushed. So I got on the plane, flew up to Alaska, and of course, DN did not remember he told me that day before that he'd pick me up at the airport. Either that, or he didn't think it was worth it. Whatever it was the most awful feeling to be forgotten about and left there stranded. Even more humiliating was when an elderly couple at the airport saw me waiting alone, picked up my lost girl vibe, and asked me if I was okay. I lost my calm demeanor. I broke down in tears at the airport. I shooed away the well-meaning couple because I couldn't keep myself together long enough to be gracious about any help they could have offered. I finally got a cab and went out to his place. I banged on the door outside and waited until I couldn't feel my fingertips anymore. And then the racket finally woke up BM, who let me inside. DN was in his room passed out on his bed. I went to his couch and waited. I didn't know exactly how to confront him, so I didn't. He already knew how I felt based on our phone call following his confession. I acted like I no longer cared about it, because the last thing I wanted to be seen as was the crazy ex. There was no way that I was gonna let his behavior and choices ruin my reputation. So I acted cool and dispassionate and kept to myself as much as possible. DN must have taken that as some sort of sign that we were just friends, as if we never had a relationship, as if he never asked me to marry him. And he had the bright idea to invite Thought over to meet me. So, as it turned out, DN told Thought that I was just a friend, and he never told her about our relationship, our engagement, me visiting frequently to see him, or me moving there to be with him, etc. It was like I was just erased and discarded. Every moment between arriving there and leaving felt like it was just me crying and feeling so incredibly hurt that it broke my whole world. I had sacrificed my family, who had all moved to the Pacific Northwest by that point. I left my job so I could move back to Alaska and be with DN. I regretted leaving them to be with DN and his empty promise of love. When the news spread to our mutual friends and family, no one could understand why DN and I were split up. I maintained my composure, as not being the crazy ex to the best of my ability. This all happened in front of people who knew us both for years. They were dumbfounded about Thought and what she was doing with DN. They put the puzzle pieces together themselves. I kept my mouth shut and only stated facts when I was asked. Yes, DN would rather be with her, so he's with her. I'm here waiting for my things to arrive so I can ship them back, and then I'm getting on the next flight out of here. One day, out of the total 2 weeks I was there, BM came out of his room and saw me and my silent waterfall of tears. He just said to me, DN is a total jerkwad. If I were you, I would be crying too. For some reason, that made me feel better about the whole thing. BM was a muscly badass to a young woman like me, and for him to say that made me feel that the world wasn't such a cruel place after all. I still had not told anybody about the pregnancy or the loss because even though I was grieving and in pain, if I mentioned any of that, I knew I would be treated like a crazy ex who was making up stories to make him feel worse, or make it about poor me. Over those 2 weeks, DN invited Thought over frequently. He probably thought it was no big deal to me. He was not thinking about me or how his behavior was affecting me. I was in a state of shock. I stayed on the couch while the two of them had their fun in DN's room, within earshot. I didn't have the energy to confront DN, or to argue as to why doing something like that was cruel and heartless. I was so angry at him that I just wanted to hurt him even worse than what he'd done to me. Before I left, I concocted a plan to poison his new relationship with Thought, and this is where the revenge plot comes into play. Now, I'm bisexual, and I knew that Thought was at least flexible in that regard, and obviously she was willing to move fast with someone. So at yet another party night, I got Thought all to myself before she got drunk, for long enough to seduce her. I shut both of us in DN's room. Meanwhile, everybody else was getting too drunk to get that anything could have been happening in there. DN was occupied with the guests and may not have noticed that we were missing. After we were finished, I told her why I was there and told her about my history with DN. With an icy and dispassionate apathy that illustrated how much DN was dead to me, I told her, if he cares about me enough to propose to me and then do what he did with you, just imagine what he'll do to you. Suddenly she understood why I'd been so somber when I was introduced to her. She had no idea that I was anything more than an innocent friend of DN's. She didn't know why I was there in Alaska or why I was waiting for boxes. She didn't know anything. She felt profoundly guilty and regretful despite the fact that she didn't know any better. DN walked in on us and must have assumed that nothing was wrong, only because nothing violent or terrible was happening in the moment. That was either hubris or drunkenness on his part. There was no confrontation again. The party went on and Thought left. The next day, Deanne asked me what I was doing with Thought. I said to him, "She was an easygoing girl, and I'm not surprised you were able to get busy with her the same day you met her. I just happened to do the same thing you did." The look on his face was priceless. He looked more mortified than I'd ever seen him. I played my poker face. He didn't know what to say after that, so he said nothing and changed the subject. Mission accomplished, or so I thought. There's more. So I got my belongings finally and shipped them all straight back to where they came from. I didn't hear from Deanne again for the next 5 years. 5 years later, I was married and had just learned that week that I was pregnant with my first child. I then got an email from Deanne as he tracked me down through social media back in 2005. He said he wanted to catch up with me, and so I obliged with a phone call, thinking I was gonna gloat about being married and having a kid to rub it in his face. So Deanne told me all about the karma that went down after I left. He chuckled and said, "You didn't go crazy while you were here, but whatever you did planted a seed that grew into something that destroyed my life." He didn't say it word for word, but close to it. I think he used the word cancer in there somewhere. Perhaps my intentions to avenge my dead fetus invited my guardian angels, or demons more likely, to intercede in the situation. So here's the karma in order of appearance. So Thought cheated on him with his best friend, and then moved in with the dude only 2 weeks after I left. Ouch. He got fired from his job on Christmas Eve. His boss was another mutual friend who heard about what he did to me and decided he didn't want the guy working at his video store anymore. His truck broke down in front of the electrical station and got impounded. He didn't have enough money to get it out since he lost his job, so he lost his truck too. That's a pretty bad situation when you live in a place like Alaska in the middle of winter. His family caught wind of what went down with me and disowned him. Now, I thought that was pretty extreme, but I just chalked it up to karma. So after Thought was gone, his remaining friends unsurprisingly threw another drinking party at his place. Except this time, they got him wasted and then beat the crap out of him and threw him out of his own home into a snowstorm and locked him out. He took refuge with a neighbor, but later on had to leave the state because he had been shunned by all his remaining friends. He had no family or job or truck, etc. He was now single without even a thought to lean on. When we spoke, he had been living in Texas rethinking his life and wanted to know how I was doing after our friendship ended. And that's when I decided it was time to tell him about the baby we could have had. He started to cry, and I told him how much it sucked for me and how I tried to tell him before but I couldn't. He was sobbing on the other line and couldn't stop apologizing. He then said, "I had no idea you were pregnant. We had sex, so it's not like it was impossible for that to happen. I tried to tell you, but at the time it was more important for you to confess your horrible choice than to listen to my news." There were more sobs on the other end and more apologies than I've ever heard in my life from anybody. I ended the call by saying, "It's really okay. I don't hate you. I really wanted to say I pity you, but I held my tongue." I told him that things are better for me now. I'm married and we just found out that we're pregnant with our first child. Anyway, it's been really nice catching up with you and finding out what happened with your life. I'm sorry to hear it's been difficult. Let's keep in touch. And he didn't. I don't know why he bothered contacting me in the first place, because he must have had some idea how that call was gonna go down, but he probably wasn't counting on finding out that he could have been a father, and that we could have had a family together. If only he hadn't crushed the heart of somebody who actually cared about him. So in hindsight, that relationship was nothing more than me confusing his charm for actual love. I spent so much time wondering and questioning what I'd done to deserve him doing all of that to me. What I didn't realize is that he didn't do any of that because of me, or to punish me for any reason. He did all that because the only person he had been thinking about was himself. I realized that I had narrowly escaped getting myself stuck in Alaska and romantically committed to a person who has little capacity for empathy and doesn't feel remorse when he wrongs somebody. I learned how to get revenge by maintaining my grace and composure, stating only the facts and keeping my emotions to myself and my demeanor together, just long enough to plant doubt in the heart of a new woman. 5 years after he crushed my heart, he cried enough to fill a bottle with his tears, and my satisfaction poured it on the flowers on the grave of our baby that could have been. My friends, they do say that karma is the best form of revenge. I'm glad things worked out for OP in the end and that she's now living happily ever after. And that brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge. Guys, we made it. It was a long story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. And if you missed the last episode of our /ProRevenge, I will link it right here. If not, you can listen to a Karen story right here. Guys, check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you.